We're live.
We're live. We're here again. Good morning, Obi and everyone.
Good morning, Greg. Thank you for having me back again.
Thank the mountain. It's the
Episode
mountains.
7. Okay, thank you, Mountain.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Right on. So you had an owl making a nest in your chimney?
Yeah, it woke me up, not last night it stopped, but 3 nights in the middle of the night I heard this kind of noise and it woke me up and I took a chance and went up there and screamed at whatever it was and it stopped, which makes me think it was an owl. If it was a rodent, of course, it'd come back in a half hour and start digging again. So I think owls, there are a lot of owls up here. And you know, all the birds now, when the sun came out, they're beginning to do their courting thing, look for nests. The buzzards are now circling around, checking out all the knotholes in the bay trees. They're all kind of saying, well, where are we gonna raise our young this year?
That's right. Well, here we are. The green curtain has fallen. You know, the last time we were outside, we were it was brown here.
That's right, because the rain kept us in before.
Right. We've been inside for a couple of months now.
So the landscape could do a trick on us.
And I guess we're in a nice little window here at the beginning of February. It was sunny yesterday.
Yes.
Very overcast and cold today. And that's okay. That's exactly seasonal.
Right. It's been very windy up on the mountain, much more down below. But as you know, here in the Bay Area, the higher elevations do get more wind, particularly this time of year. So.
Well, I know that rain is on everyone's mind as it relates to the drought. California's condition here. We had some atmospheric rivers come through for 2021 or 2022's. We're calling this 2023 now, right?
Yes.
So this is actually 2022's rain year. 2021's rain year begins in October, right? That's why it's 2021.
Right.
That we got some good atmospheric rivers, but then then we had record dryness for January, February, and March last year that perpetuated the drought. Now we're at 200% snowpack across the Sierra Nevada, and that's pretty good for an uptick out of extreme drought conditions across the state, unless we see the same pattern repeat itself, which is increasing aridity in the early spring months. But we've got a storm coming in this weekend. I hear more than a foot's going to drop in the Sierra Nevada this weekend.
Much?
Yeah,
so
it's going to be quite a bit. So that's great for the beginning of February, thinking about such things as wildfire season this summer.
Well, a couple things, Obi. Yeah, I mean, everybody's cheering. And one of the things, if you look around at the length of the grass, you mentioned the previous year when we had one atmospheric storm, which is enormous. Remember the one that you're referring to in 2021. But that year, well, then in 2022, a year ago in February, after that, you didn't see as much green. In fact, a lot of the new growth was starting already to wither because we had that rain, which sprouted everything, and then nothing. And but we really all of the green grass is here. The miner's lettuce is all growing in big bunches here. So we've had seemingly plenty of water, but I think the rain and all of what's going on, we should remember to take nothing for granted.
Nothing for granted. Well, we're going to talk a lot today about that. I've got a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about today, Greg. I feel like Mabel McKay is somewhere wondering if I didn't have a good breakfast or not, because I have a lot of kind of wacky ideas. But as you've said before, this Indian stuff gets kind of wacky.
As my great aunt said, yeah, this Indian business is kind of kooky, ain't it?
That's it, kooky. All right. That's right. First, I want to congratulate you. We got a big announcement this week, huh?
Yeah. It happened a month ago, but yeah, I was elected chair of the Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian. It's an honor and really great for my people and for all of us. It's a lot of work, but I look forward to it. I keep getting these chairman positions. I was also just sworn in for my 16th consecutive term as chairman of my tribe. I kind of think 16 might
Wonderful.
be enough.
Well, let's see. Well, you've got a lot of writing to do too, don't you? How's the writing coming?
It's coming slowly. I'm going to be a little past my deadline. Do you hear that, my editor? But I think it's going good. The stories are going great, and they're a takeoff from How a Mountain Was Made. So.
Yes. Well, we share the same publisher and the same editor, actually.
They're
And
great.
The great Emmerich.
Will that help you be kind to me?
I think Emmerich's default is kind. He's kind to his core. But you're working on really the sequel to How a Mountain Was Made, right?
Yeah, it's what happens to the people after they leave the mountain, Obi.
Okay.
I put the stories in historic time, so that I call them the forgetter stories, because the people. One of the things about us humans is we tend to forget the morals or the lessons of our ancestors that enabled us to live a sustainable relationship with the natural world and with one another. So how do we? These are stories, and they're fun and often humorous. People are often silly in the ways they forget things or take things for granted, like, oh, well, we got plenty of rain, so we're going to be fine.
Yeah. Right. Well, that has something to do with the way that we were made, according to the old stories, and that's what we want to touch on today. I would like to talk about it anyway. One of the last stories in your book, How a Mountain Was Made, and the story is called Coyote. How Coyote Makes People, isn't that right?
Yeah, or Coyote Creates People, or something like that. I know the story.
Coyote
I forget
Creates People.
Yeah.
Okay.
Coyote Creates People. I got
That's
it.
right.
I got it right. I wrote it. I might try to remember it.
Well, I mean, it's so memory is key to this. If we can go over to this, I think there are many issues brought up by this story that are relevant to this continuing conversation we're having here on Place and Purpose. Episode 7 now we're at, February.
Yeah.
Feeling like a new year, feeling all this life come up, I thought that Coyote Creates People would be a nice focus for our psychological investigations, ecological investigations today. Because what happens is that, for those of you who don't have Greg's book, How a Mountain Was Made, is that Coyote is a chief.
Yes.
He's the chief of the village, right here on top of the mountain.
Right. Yeah.
Back when, in this sacred time, it's interesting because you were going to say historical time for your next book, but in this sacred time, when animals were people, which is something that you say.
Yeah, they all had a human form: raccoon, coyote, bobcat, condor, vulture, crow. All of them were one village of human beings up here.
One village, that's right. This story involves Old Man Crow and his gambling partner, Elk.
Yes.
The 7 Bat brothers,
Yeah.
who are married to the 7 sisters in the sky, the Pleiades, right?
The Pleiades, yes.
Yeah. So there's these citizens of the village. Coyote is removed. He is lonely. He's isolated. And he's a creator. He's an artisan, and he decides that he's going to, in order to entice friendship, which is so this idea of isolation in his mind is largely self-imposed. Like,
Yeah.
and this is what his nephew Chicken Hawk keeps trying to tell him that. So he has this idea that I'm going to make these nice belts.
Yeah.
For these people, the village, in order to
Have
it won't be
company,
so-
talk
have
to
com-
them,
that's right.
and
and so it's all about him. Okay, so it's about him, and he comes up with this scheme to make the belts faster,
Yeah.
and so he can get more friends quicker. And this is where it begins to unravel for him. So he goes to Bobcat. and Bobcat has the shape shifting song,
Yeah.
which is it's the psychological crucible of this story, and I think about this shape shifting song how plastic is the mind that can actually transform one thing into another to bring about the next paradigm. How Coyote creates people now is resultant from this song. And then there's like this whole, the story kind of takes on like there's like a horror like element when Coyote inadvertently makes these twins for all of these people, all of the people in his village.
Yeah.
And he's and they're standing around blankly. Well, they're just blinking. They don't know how to talk. They don't know how to do much of anything, and
They
they're
don't know the
freaking everybody out.
stories. They don't know. They're in some ways soulless.
They're soulless.
The interesting thing about Coyote, even before he, did all of this, Coyote was the one that I would say, and that's why he features so prominently, not just in our traditional indigenous stories, but in so many American Indian indigenous stories. He's the one that has the most human-type characteristics. He's smart, he's clever, he's a leader. As you said, he's creative. But like us, he forgets often to think about the consequences of his actions, thinking that he can do what he wants without ever there being any kind of ramification about what he did.
Mm-hmm.
And he's constantly having to learn that, as we humans do. So in the story, when he creates these doubles of each of these people up here, they're like him. They're lonely. They feel separated from everything. They don't actually know where they are. And like him, they want to talk to people. They need people. So they attach themselves to their double. They attach, but the people are afraid of them. And so Bobcat turns around and says, I'm going to give you all a shape-shifting song. You're going to become, inform what you are as a human. So, Bobcat grows his 4 legs. The birds grow wings. These soulless ones that are left are the ones that are left with a human form. They're the humans, and they're the ones that have to be told the stories and remember them and carry them forward as they leave the mountain. So the animals, it's as I think I've mentioned this before, Obi. This is sort of the inverse of the Judeo-Christian tradition, where there's the great chain of being and man, God's on top, and then man, woman, all the way down to the grasses and so forth. Here, the grasses and the animals and all of that are the smart ones who got away from the soulless humans that have forgotten the stories. So we're in a position in our lives to remember to think about everybody else and remember the consequences of our actions. Otherwise, we're going to keep getting in trouble. And we're reminded that we're not the center of the universe, that we're part of everything. So the stories really teach that in a humorous way, showing how, well, I guess I'll just say it, how ridiculous sometimes we can be by thinking we're so smart.
The dislodging of the anthropocentrism by way of the anthropomorphism is the technique there. And I think, too, ecologically, even the idea of the Anthropocene, this age of humans, is a very non-anthropocentric point of view.
Yeah.
It's very much inclusive, where our thoughts now, the philosopher Timothy Morton puts it, have like this earth magnitude, as if how does this superorganism interact with the planet now? So what we have here in your story, though, the idea of animal species. Species. What is a species? This is again this sort of like ontologically. What is a species? Species don't really exist necessarily, or when like is a species like a kind of like a set of situations, an ecological surrogate, if you will, for something else at play. When we look at anything too long, what are we looking at besides sort of like, again, Timothy Morton says, human flavored data? Our confirmation bias confirms what we are already looking for.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we recreate. I mean, that's the essential definition of self-fulfilled prophecy. We recreate what we think we know, or what is right, or what is normal. We keep recreating what is normal, even if it's abnormal, even if it's anti-environment. We keep creating that. And I think in the larger scale, if you look at what's going on today, we are in this huge earth shift where, say, in ancient times, these humans came about. Now these humans have forgotten everything that they learned when they left the mountain. And once again, we're going to go through a huge shift or transformation because we forgot that we're not the center of the universe, that we have to look at our motives, that selfishness and anything that where we aren't reminded of how we're connected to everything else and have to be responsible, it's going to come back on us. Things will bite. I mean, if you don't leave the snake alone and you think, well, I'm hungry or I need to step on it or get it out of here, eventually it's going to bite you. And so we're going through this thing where the large community that is life on earth, the one community that is life on earth, is saying again to these humans, to us, you're forgetting something.
Very good. Now, that reminds me of a question from one of our listeners here where Barbara writes to us and she says, would you advocate for including a climate clause in our U.S. Constitution, as many non-Western countries have already done, for a global constitution with strong environmental protections, for an overhaul of our legal theories pertaining to the laws of the sea so as to better protect the one ocean we share, or other big ideas like that?
Barbara, let me just say right off the bat, absolutely. And in fact, until nations the sea, you mentioned the seas, they're the one things we share. Maybe starting there, we can learn to start sharing and come to compromises between us. Because, Barbara, the wars that we're in, the discussions we're having these days about, woke or not woke, or Democrat or Republican, in 10 years or so, Barbara, they're going to look like tea parties in a hailstorm. And in anticipating that, why don't we start what we know how is to amend our constitutions, to make laws, if for nothing else, to remind us of how important it is to start thinking together to survive as one.
Yes. I caution, though, Greg, that if we go about predicting the future in a way that does not account for the complexity of these systems, that
you mean human systems?
Human systems?
Yeah.
I mean ecological systems.
Oh, yeah.
Start making laws that say one thing when we don't understand the ramifications of all things. We might perpetuate particular injustices. To say, for example, to mitigate how environmental laws might disproportionately affect the poor, for example.
Yeah.
And keep the rich, keep the status quo in place would be the key litmus somehow for an appropriate constitutional adjustment, which I don't know if I am a supporter of.
Well,
I would say that we would be treating the symptoms and not the cure. But we don't have a lot of precedent.
Well, let's talk about what the disease is. The disease is greed. The disease is separateness from one another. And I totally concur with you that the poor and poorer nations are taking the brunt and will continue to take the brunt of the consequences of our greed and taking more than we need. As I've said before, the big thing here, Obi, and this would be very hard to legislate, I agree, is that we have to quit glorifying, normalizing excess in our lives and sharing. I would like to see where it's popular, whereas I once said, if Oprah were an oak tree, think how fast the sudden oak death would go away, or we could have but wouldn't it be popular if stars, all of these big movie stars and rock stars, it became popular how much you gave away? I mean, you become a star by the amount, to the extent that you are using your opportunity, your business, to help others, to make things more level, more equitable. Until we can get past the addiction to materialism and greed, which of course, Obi, is based on our fear that we don't have enough, or it's going to protect us. Until we can get past that and start sharing, that's the bottom line. So you're right. I mean, we can legislate all we want, but again, it does not will not take into consideration those who are going to pay for our legislation. It's going to be very tough for Americans to give up materialism, give up their need for excess, their competition with one another.
Sure. I look at the history of environmental law, and I think one of the most particularly effective laws in the past 50 years would be the Endangered Species Act, and I see that there is room to begin the discussion, as have other countries around the world, including New Zealand and in India and Canada and Mexico, et cetera, who have experimented with personhood for watersheds or non-human persons. What would it take for winter, for example, to have its day in court? For winter to sue for its right to exist? These non-human systems.
Rain's not a disaster, let's say.
Rain's not a disaster. Weather is not a disaster. Changing the perspective. And I think there's great ground in the stories that you present here. It's a returning to an indigenous mindset of sorts. So let's get back to what's happening right here and right now. Episode 7 of Place and Purpose. We're giving away a couple of our books today. You got to stay to the end of our discussion about to find out who the winner is going to be. I guess we're going to be giving away a copy of Becoming a Story, your book, and a copy of The State of Water, Understanding California's Most Precious Resource.
So should we hold them up?
Okay, you hold them up.
Yes. Since Obi's done just a wonderful job of publicizing my book, the least I can do is hold up his. I'm holding
Thank
his
you, sir.
In this hand.
Thank you, sir. Right on. Why don't we talk about let's talk about water recharge. We have a question here from a listener named Christopher. It says, since we have covered so much of the natural landscape, how can the aquifers and underground water supplies be replenished? Do we need to create ways to do this directly? Absolutely we do. I went to a fantastic thing a couple weeks ago, Greg. I don't know if you and I have had a chance to talk about this, but I went out hiking with Wade Crowfoot, our Secretary of Natural Resources here in California.
Just in the middle of the water battle over the Colorado River, have you seen?
That's going to get more heated. Yes, pun intended.
Yes.
And I also went out with Armando Quintero, who's the director of our state parks here in California. Very insightful thinkers, leaders who are capable of nuanced thought and have terribly difficult jobs of weighing that risk and this risk. And we were with the Secretary of Agriculture out there in a test farm right in the Turlock Water District.
What was his name? Who's the Secretary of Agriculture?
Helen. I can't remember her last name now. I met her briefly, but there was a number of administrators there. In fact, it was funny because we were surrounded by farmers and we were surrounded by government administrators. And I was talking to one of the farmers, and they thought that these were like political officials, and no, these are administrators. There's not one person here who was elected. Right. They were all appointed right? Yeah. So these are people who are really trying to do their best, do their human best to keep Sacramento apace with what is happening on the ground. And what is happening on the ground right now is that an enormous amount of water fell on the state of California. How do we utilize this water right now? Permitting process, for example, to use this water is very slow. And one of the ways that you replenish the aquifer, because right now across the Central Valley, it's not really irrigation season for the plants. What you want to do is you want to flood the trees. Yeah. You want to flood the orchards in order to put that water back in the ground. And by replenishing the aquifer, you're actually helping the rivers and the more than human ecology as well, not just the dollars that is the agriculture. So getting those systems in place is what Sacramento is really trying to pivot quickly to do, to actually be able to use these floodwaters in a productive way to replenish the water system. And then we went down to Dos Rios, which is going to be our newest state park there. Yeah. Right where the
rivers come together.
Where the Tuolumne River hits the San Joaquin. And River Partners, which is the organization that has been rehabbing this once farmland, they got it about 20 years ago. And now it's this gorgeous riparian corridor where the endangered rabbits and the endangered birds are all coming back. You build it. It's very much the best idea of that. They build it. We build it and they will come. Support the habitat. The beavers were playing in the floodwaters. The birds of prey were soaring overhead. It was a magnificent day of hope here in our vision for a California that looks like it was. That was the impression I had out there, to see this. You give it half a chance and it's going to resurge. These ecological systems, these robust systems of resiliency and diversity in these arboreal, these flooded conditions on these wetlands. There's salmon in those waters right now, we were thinking to ourselves. It is all still here. That's the thing. These systems, California can't. We began this conversation by talking about memory and forgetting what we know. The land remembers. If we can foster those nodes of remembering by doing things like replenishing the aquifer, taking care of the rivers, this is solving for problem that Wendell Berry talks about in the land ethic tradition.
Is it we replenish the aquifers or allow them to be replenished? Because we can't actually replenish them. We have to allow the conditions so that they replenish themselves.
Sure. No, no, that's more exact language.
One of the wonderful things about this. Remember, the Sacramento Valley in winter times. You referenced the ancient times or before European contact. Virtually was an inland sea during the winter. It was underwater, and it got back, and it raises so much of what we're talking about, Obi, because we can't go back exactly to that. But when you see, even when I see down here in Rohnert Park in the valley here after these rains, these torrential rains, I'm reminded when you see that water, immense amounts of water covering the land, I'm reminded and thoughtful of that time that allowed all of life to continue here.
Yeah.
So allowing this to happen, seeing it happen, providing open space for it to happen, for water to gather in order to replenish and in order to create habitat to bring back and enable the life that was here. The birds, you mentioned the rabbits, but certainly the waterfowl. It reminds us, and I'm reminded of stories. As soon as I see the water everywhere, it takes you all the way back to what was, and then you think, okay, now with what's here, what can be? What can we do? And that's the start. That's the positive sort of thing that I think you were just alluding to. Opening these places, opening these parks, so that they do become a locus of health and rebirth and regeneration. I don't know that we can do more than that right now, but that's a wonderful thing to start doing. And I believe that healthy cells, call them stem cells of the earth, can regenerate the life, the body of the earth, right? Whatever ails us. So, I think that that's so important again. And life and the coho salmon and the salmon, all the other species of salmon, the birds, they're still around. But we're going to have to learn to live together. All of the people aren't going to go away. And we need much of the land for food. But again, it goes back to a sense of sharing. And when I talk about sharing and stopping the greed and so forth, it's an ancient thing that us indigenous people did. It's called sacrifice. We sacrifice certain things. So that others could live. We sacrificed greed. We gave away more than we had. We constantly remembered that you can't take more than you can put back. It's a rule. It's a law of that humans, particularly contemporary cultures, Western cultures, have forgotten.
What we have forgotten, this memory loss, there's a loss of resiliency there too, isn't there? The resiliency. I mean, you could even call it a resilience debt, the inability of systems to recover, given increased simplification, right? So, as we are losing species, as we are losing habitat, as we are as we watch ecologies become, perhaps they edge toward a tipping point, as all complex systems eventually have. And these emergent phenomena, tipping points is another emergent phenomenon that happens in these complex systems. If it gets too simple, it verges on collapse, and that is your prophetic warning, I believe, about the Tea Party. That all of this
the hailstorm.
As we get to those tipping points, if they in fact do exist and emerge, how do we prevent those? And I see in the stories of how a mountain was made that there is an understanding of the quantifiable ecological measure that is memory loss in the land and on the land, and as it is embodied in the stories that we tell as a community. And that somehow to me is a better inroad than top-down legislation, and it's also more engaging than putting all of the pressure on the individual to just like put the plastic bottle in the right bin and you'll feel better about yourself and drive your electric car and all of this like virtue signaling that you're like somehow like doing good for the planet, when in fact you might just have been told lies about, well, in fact, your electric car is being fueled from coal-powered electricity, and only 5% of plastics are ever recycled anyway. So like all of this, we have a lot of lies coming at us too about what is really good for the more than human world.
Yeah, a couple things here that you're making me think about. What has become abnormal and unhealthy in many ways has become normal. We are separated from the land. And as we talked earlier in this conversation about the ways in which self-fulfilled prophecy, how we keep recreating what we see, we'll keep recreating what is normal, even if it's not normal and not sustainable. So again, we are cultures that adhere to often religions that say this isn't our home, it's in the afterlife, whatever. But what is healthy is a relationship and a consciousness and a practice of that relationship, of a oneness with everything. I do want to go back to what you said about the so-called apocalypse or the tipping points. They're not they're not the atom bomb. What they are is Earth correcting itself.
Yeah.
And we will be part of that correction or we won't.
Yeah.
So I think it's something to look forward to. It's like the new grass coming up. It will be a rebirth, a rebirthing. And you could ask most women who've had children, labor is intensive, it's painful, but it's what continues life.
Yes.
And the tipping points, everybody thinks, oh my God, we're going to fall off the face of the earth. There are signs now that we need to begin to change. Those signs will become more intense, and either we change with this rebirthing for a healthier life, which Earth will make happen, or we don't.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to say, oh my God, it's going to be over in 10 years. We can start changing now, changing our consciousness, changing the way we're at peace with the earth, simultaneously at peace within ourselves. You can't have one without the other. So before you start wanting to save the earth, I know so many environmentalists, as I'm sure you do, oh my God, they're running around like chickens with their heads off. We got to do this, running around, and never stop to think, wait a minute, by pushing legislation, by doing all of this, in what ways am I continuing this pattern of madness and lack of peace? Peace from within first, so that it can guide us in what we do politically.
That's the important trick, isn't it?
That's the hard one for me, and especially those of us in leadership positions. You, in your leadership positions as a revered environmentalist and artist and writer, Obi, the pressure's on us to be stars, and the whole kinds of thing are leaders, and that kind of pressure can also get you caught up in that vortex of doing, and I have learned that if I don't stop and look at what's around me and see the huge waters that have come and remember the ancient times and my place in this magical world, I'm not good. I get burned out.
Yeah.
I die like the environment could, or get sickened. So I think that real test for all of us, no matter what we're doing, how we're doing as parents, as friends, lovers, as people who have animals, it's to once again try to put our feet on the ground, take a breath, and say, I'm with this place, not against it.
Well, that's beautiful. As I approach this in my own work, I attempt to avoid the use of the word we, because I can't speak for anyone else. And I suppose this gets to something deeply democratic about my value system. I can be accountable for what I am up to. I believe I can be, although, I question whether or not free will even exists or not. But I do believe that when I am speaking about what I am learning, what I understand, that it needs to come from a first-person perspective. And that is why I'm very light on prescriptive measure, because I understand that there is so much that I don't know about any given situation. And I feel like so many dialectic modalities these days, most apparently in the toxicity of social media, where opinions seem to become fact, or be just blurred with fact, right? They confused with fact.
Well, everybody's got their own facts.
Everyone's got their own facts, and in fact, they don't. They don't. Anyway, let's pull it back to some of these questions that are coming in.
I want to say something because you said you don't want to say we.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sort of in a
Please.
difficult position because I'm a leader, and a leader, and I've been a professor.
Right.
I'm positioned in a way to lead, and I don't lead I lead us or we.
Right.
So it's a kind of different position. But my take is this: my job, as a professor, and as a political, let's say, leader, tribal leader, isn't to tell people what to think, Obi.
Yes.
It's to help them learn how to think. And once you learn to help them, to teach them how to think, not what to think. So let's start thinking this way and see what conclusions we come to together.
That's right.
The old Indian leaders, by the way, it was a tough job. Thank God I'm not one of the old people because the old chairmen or chiefs, they had to always get consensus on everything. If they didn't get consensus, they risked being hoodooed or poisoned by somebody. So if you couldn't bring people together on everything, they got rid of you. So the pressure was on always to make consensus. So I think, one of my successes as a leader is to foster dialogue and between people to come to consensus. So I do have to think about the we.
The we.
Yeah.
Well, you're very specific in your use of the we. I guess what I'm talking about is this more generalized contrivance that is often we in terms of exclusion and not inclusion.
Yeah. Well,
we versus
that's the
you.
us, them versus we.
Us, them.
Yeah.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
yeah.
What are the we are talking about?
Yeah.
Especially given my own racial identity, gender identity, sexual orientation, economic privilege, all of this stuff comes into play in a very dynamic political and social landscape of the 21st century. And I think when approaching ideas of justice, and I could spend all my days just thinking about the flower that is justice in all of its forms, and how do I foster that and enable that in my own heart and in my own work. More and more imposing ideologies that are wrapped up even in the word we doesn't serve the better voice that I espouse, which is what I put forth in these books, which these books. Gosh, Greg, getting back to what I was talking about earlier about who is the decider of what exists or not on a philosophical level, right? I see these
power relationship.
I'm drawing map after map of these wilderness areas in the deserts right now. My next book is the deserts of California, and it's like, God, these areas don't exist. Yeah. This doesn't exist. It's real in a very abstract, conceptual, legal system that speaks very little about what actually is. I mean, the Mojave Desert itself is split right in two. This is one of my big conundrums with this new book, The Deserts of California, is that, half of the Mojave is not in California. Right. And there's like this, this imaginary line from Lake Tahoe to the Colorado River.
Everybody
that means
watch
nothing.
and see what Obi does with that.
Right, exactly. Well, I really have to take things on, like desert resource conservation.
Well, where does the mountain
program,
begin and end?
Where does the mountain begin and end? The mountain is an object.
Yeah.
but so does place even exist, or is it just a localized network?
I think there's a set of relationships.
Yes. Okay.
And what it is the mountain is a set of relationships. One of the magic things about Sonoma Mountain is that it kind of reminds us of that. Maybe that's why it's always been so sacred.
Yeah.
Because it seems from afar just like a bunch of high hills, but once you get up here, it's so easy to get lost because all of a sudden there's a meadow. You turn around and there's a stream, and you can't see the meadow. And then you're constantly seeing these different parts of the mountain that are the mountain, but they're aspects of this whole thing, and you can only see where you are.
You can only see where you are. Well, that's Immanuel Kant. I mean, that's the study of metaphysics, that things don't really exist without a signifier and a designator. It doesn't really exist without you imagine. The mountain doesn't exist without us imagining it as a mountain.
I really take exception with Kant because that Kant ultimately privileges the center of the human being, that the world does not exist without the human being.
That's right.
I take complete exception with him. I did as an undergraduate and as a graduate, but in college, because I do believe there is an incredible, magical world out there, always with me, but not only because I'm here seeing it.
Yes. Yes, but that's right. I mean, that's so what does it exist more though like in a social context? I'm thinking about what is made real to us and what real actually means. And for example, like a Marxist view would be like, well, human economic relations makes things real. Like this is a mountain made real because of made a mountain. I mean, in objective reality, the geological physiographic entity exists, but it's a mountain defined by the people who have lived here for thousands of years. Right.
Yeah, but isn't Marxism predicated on political systems, the existence of certain economic or political systems?
Yes. Well, certainly. But I'm saying this is kind of a Marxist point of view to say that things are made real by economic value. I mean, certainly when we think of fire, when we think of water, when we think of air, when we think of the big one, climate, it can be thought of as only being real in terms of value systems humans have applied to it.
Well, yes, but I also think of the things that humans have that have been enabled us to grow and change, and if you want to use the word evolve, and that's fire. And I go back to watching the sunsets and lately in the winter sky, and the fire from the sun, the glory from the sun. I see fire as that taken from the sun, taken from the heat, and that is what centers us. Rather than, I mean, there's economics, you can break it out into that sort of thing. But for me, I cannot separate the, if you want to call it spiritual, or the stories of the sun and fire and all of those sorts of things from the clamshell disc speeds that I trade for value with somebody. It's all part of one thing. And it's about how you relate to those things. I think we get very dangerous because thinking about and defining things according to one story, thinking about things in terms of Marxism and Marxist definitions of economics, for me, is as dangerous as taking a line from the New Testament and imposing it on the morals of a people. It's a singular text. Let's make it plural. Let's see it all interacting. Let's not forget the magic, if you will.
Well, that's beautifully put.
Yeah.
Getting back to you were saying fire, energy. We have another question from a listener here, Lucy, who says, given that prescribed burns, getting prescribed burns accomplished is so difficult logistically and politically, what would be other solutions for managing the fuel loads accumulating in our forests and other natural areas? She goes on specifically to talk about her interest in, she wants to talk about eucalyptus trees in particular in urban environments. The eucalyptus tree is a very
and
old.
the eucalyptus tree is a perfect example in some ways of all the things we're talking about, Obi, about from the top of the stories, the coyote stories. We had an idea that the eucalyptus tree here would be a great windbreak for the winds. That we brought them in. Yes, they were a great windbreak.
That's part of it. We're talking about railroad ties too, because they
railroad ties
grow so fast. They shatter
they grow
like
really
glass.
fast.
Yeah.
All of these things.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't consider the larger picture. One, they tip over.
Mm-hmm.
Two, they're highly explosive. They're full of oil. They burn. But again, that's just another contemporary coyote story of our lack of considering the consequences of our kind of selfish needs.
Selfish needs, that's right. But, just like those coyote stories, I mean, a lot of good happened out of those stories.
Sure.
Too. Right now, eucalyptus groves are some of the most important monarch butterfly habitat across the state as well. There's these emergent phenomena that are not... You can't just remove the eucalyptus now if you want to see monarch butterflies.
Absolutely.
Remain.
That's one of the magical things that shows you once again
effects.
There will be consequences of what we do, good and bad, and then we manage accordingly.
That's right.
Because we can't get rid of it. Everybody wants to get rid of all the cows or get rid of all of this or get rid of all of that. If you look around here, 90% of the grass and stuff you see is not indigenous.
Right.
And yet the deer and all of life and the aquifers are dependent upon it keep growing.
Right.
So it's how do we evolve and manage with it? That's the other thing. Be here now and look at it. So many people want to go back to the ancient days or all of this. We, first of all, I think, need to say, what do we have here?
That's right. Well, we've got a lot. It's interesting. Here we are entering another burn window, as they say, and early spring is a good time to get some of this prescribed burning done. State now has a plan to do about 400,000 acres a year
Of controlled burning?
of controlled burning. We
That's
never make that. Jerry Brown said he wanted 500,000. We've never done more than 100,000 a year because there's a lot of issues with controlled burning. It's a very costly, logistics heavy,
And potentially dangerous.
That's right. There's been a couple that have gotten out of control. Controlled burning is a questionable term. Prescribed burning is
one of the things we're
better.
wrestling with. We want to do what the indigenous people did, but remember the indigenous people were following climate, weather cycles and patterns that told them when at the moment to do these things. We try to put things on a calendar, and that calendar day might not be the best day to do the controlled burning.
Mm-hmm. It's a very important point. Very sophisticated system of mixed severity fire application on an anthropogenic scale for thousands of years, given a particular population, movement of that population throughout different vegetative habitat types, led to an incredibly robust biodiversity in California. Biodiversity or pyrodiversity is biodiversity. Getting the fire back on the land, getting our ability to negotiate, to qualify what good fire is in the next 50 years will be a huge determinant in the quality of our residency over the next several hundred years. We're facing all of these incredibly difficult challenges, from climate to drought to management and suppression policy to urban wildland development there at the interface of the two, that are really complicating these natural systems of productive burn regimes, which gosh, every arboreal system, we're talking every landscape type in California has an adaptive strategy towards fire. They need it to come through on a regularized basis.
Yeah.
And to not understand that is puts us at an unnecessary odds with this larger place, this California, this floristic province.
Yeah, I think controlled burning isn't the only thing. Of course, also, I think we have to do is whatever we can do to mimic health in the environment.
Sure.
I don't burn here, but what I do, if you look at all the trees here, if you look around at the trees, I keep them pruned up and all the undergrowth out from under them.
Right.
And in this little area right here that I have control of, what I've done is mimicked the ancient environment that looked much like this, because it was either burned and or grazed, so that the lower growth didn't suck up the water and all of that. One of the things that happened as a consequence of the lack of huge herds grazing on the grass, the consequence of not controlled burning, is we got all the undergrowth, which sucked up the water.
Yes.
So I try to mimic here in my own little way an indigenous care of the land. I'm not burning, but I'm cutting up and pruning.
Question from Susan. Interesting Greg's use of the term miner's lettuce. I've read most indigenous people find that offensive and prefer Indian lettuce.
You can call it whatever you want. If I were to say Indian lettuce, you're probably right. But if I were to say Indian lettuce, most people probably wouldn't know what it was. More people would know it's miner's lettuce. With a lesson plan for those who are listening: miner's lettuce can be called Indian lettuce.
That's right. And common names.
Yeah, common names. Yeah.
Don't mean anything botanically.
No. Or nutritionally.
Question from Felicity. Can you tell us where these amazing wetlands restorations is taking place? Yes, that's at the Dos Rios Ranch. There'll be a major announcement coming from the state soon that it is indeed going to be our next state park. The Central Valley will finally have a place that you can go and you can camp, and it's right where the Tuolumne River hits the San Joaquin River. Just many, 20 miles south of Stockton, something like that. So these incredible freed wetlands to flood will protect Stockton too.
Well,
the urban from the flood.
And again, right there where you're going to be in the center of the incredible Aboriginal wetlands, and you're going to be able to experience that in space.
That's right.
And hopefully it can grow. We'll grow together.
That's right. That's wonderful. Okay, so we've got a winner to announce. Thank you for everyone for sticking around to the end here.
Oh, wow.
Savoy Stevens of Los Angeles is our winner today.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you indeed. I guess you can if you register for our list at placeandpurpose.live, your name goes into a hat. We'll be giving books away every episode that remains in our year-long odyssey that is Place and Purpose. Greg, thank you once again for inviting us into your home, onto your
Obi,
mountain.
thanks for traveling up here. And, it's so wonderful to be with people and be up here on the mountain and in the Bay Area with folks where, it's popular to be thinking.
Thank you, Greg. All right, we'll see you in March.
We'll see you in March. Thank you, everyone. Thank you again, Obi.